Eclectic, genuine, an agent of change and culture, a fashionista. Our final guest for this season of Proper Bantah marches to the beat of her own drum and has an infectious personality and spirit that's undeniable. For the last time this season, let's Bantah. So it's crazy to think about it, but it's already the end of season 1 of Proper Bantah, and we have a great guest today, Vi Pham. So excited to talk to you about a number of things. So thank you so much for being here, Vi.
Thank you for having me, Rasheed.
All right, so let's get right into it.
Okay.
Tell me a bit about where you were born and where you grew up.
Yeah, so I was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and I grew up there for about 4 years of my life, and then my parents and I immigrated to the States, and I grew up in Orange County, California.
Okay, so do you have any memories growing up in Vietnam, or were you just too young?
Barely. I remember a big black dog that we had, and then that's it. That's all I remember.
That's it, a big black
Yeah.
dog. So I can imagine, I feel like immigration is a constant theme that we've discussed on the show so far.
Absolutely.
But what was it like, just coming to America at such a young age and getting integrated to the system and the culture here? What was, growing up like?
Oh man, I mean, this is obvious, but it was terrifying. I remember coming home when I was 6 and I was crying. I was in tears because I couldn't understand what any of my classmates were saying. And my mom was like, no, don't worry, you'll learn English, and I just remember not knowing exactly what was happening the whole time. It was wild. And I still think today all of the issues around immigration really they touch me really deeply because I'm like, that could have been me.
I know for a lot of people, when they go through the whole migration process, or just when you go to any new location or place, in general, you go through this process where I think, you hide certain aspects of your culture. You're I'm gonna tone it down so I can fit in more. Even for me, just being in the U.S., sometimes I'm oh, I have to speak a certain type of way. But it's no, that's not how I talk. I have an accent, but I feel there's a pressure, an onset pressure sometimes to dull yourself down to fit in. Would you say that that was the process for you as well?
Yeah, 100%. I still feel really sad thinking about it to this day, but when I was growing up and my mom and I would go out and go shopping or go out to eat, she would speak to people, and she has an accent a lot stronger than I feel like maybe I don't know if I've had one, but she has an accent. I would feel ashamed when people would question her or not understand what she was saying, or when her English wasn't very good, and I would be like, Mom, stop talking. And to this day that makes me feel so sad and ashamed that that's how I viewed my mom and that's how I viewed our culture. I think also I remember in high school I was singing this one time, and my friend looked at me. He goes, "Wow, you sound white when you sing." Whoa. And I was like, what does that mean? So yeah, I 100% resonate with that and what you were saying.
Yeah, definitely. So you speak a lot about your mom.
I do. She's a Scorpio.
Oh, Scorpio. So she seems to be an important part of your life. Tell us a 100%. Bit more about that relationship with your mom. I know that you guys have been through a lot, just leaving your country, coming here. So
yeah.
Tell us a bit about her.
Oh gosh, my mom, I think she should be a TV character because she's done things and she tells me other things that she's done in her life, and I'm like, that doesn't sound real. She told me about this time she trekked through Cambodia because she was a refugee during the Vietnam War, or about how she grew up not having enough money for rice, so she would eat rotten potatoes. Everyone says this, and I hope that it's true for everyone, but I don't think I'd be here without her.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, Sam. Oh, shout out to V's mom.
Shout out to Kimberly.
Shout out to Kimberly. Personally, I know that you're passionate about a number of things, especially when it comes to social justice and activism. So what role would you say, your culture and your upbringing, or even your mom and her experiences, what role do you think that has played in your activism and your interest in the different issues that you're passionate about?
Yeah. Oh, well, I really love citation, and I want to cite Professor Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw for the idea of like intersectionality and intersections. I think, well, she, you know, specifically created for the intersection of Black identity and the identity of womanhood, and how those two kind of combine and mix, and how the margins don't leave a lot of room for Black women to be able to like exist in law and to exist in all these spaces that other people have, you know, the ability to exist in. And so when I think about the intersections of my identity, I think a lot about what it means to be an Asian American, what it means to be a queer Asian American. And I think that is at the core of like how I approach my politics, is just like those identities, how they have been represented in greater law, in greater societal kind of cultural norms, and just being very conscious of all the different ways that humans are complex and are made up of these different embodiments.
So I feel like, you know, like social justice and activism, at least like in my experience, has become like a big buzzword today. You have a ton of people who are walking around and they're like, oh, I'm a social justice warrior, and like, you know, fighting for the greater good, which is great to a certain extent, but I feel like a lot of people are talking the talk, but not necessarily, you know, walking the walk. So I just wanted to get like your thoughts about that. Like, activism is something that's important, it's something that's necessary, but with like the whole advent of everyone being woke, like it's become a bit, you know, toxic and a bit unhealthy too. So like, what do you think about that whole thing?
I'm curious about what you think is toxic. I would love to hear more about your question.
So like, I let's see, people who just like, in my opinion, just like use being woke as like, I guess as a shield, as in, or like as a pretense, you know, like, oh, I'm woke, but they're just not necessarily doing, you know, the things that need to be done, not doing the actual groundwork. You just like spitting all these like keywords and like these theories, but like, are you actually doing anything to like change anything? Like, to me, that's like toxic woketicity, I guess, yeah.
That's interesting. You know, I think a lot about what it means to actually like make change. I think it's very difficult in this day and age to know what exactly constitutes you being part of a movement. Here's what I'll say. I think performativity, for the sake of performativity, doesn't help anyone.
Yeah.
I think if you're going around and you're hashtagging, you know, Black Lives Matter, but then you clutch your purse when you see a Black man come to you on the streets, like that's not okay, that's unacceptable. And that's not the kind of, you know, that's not the kind of association we want with being woke or being a social justice warrior. But I also think that there are so many avenues and so many ways through which people achieve change that I'm hesitant to kind of place a certain like undervaluing of specific work versus other work. So I think maybe we see things a little bit differently in that way. I think for me, what matters most is like the people who are being affected. I think if someone who, you know, I was advocating on behalf of came out to me and was like, I really don't like the way that you're doing this. I don't like the way that you're posting on social media about this. I would step back and be like, okay, what am I doing wrong? So I think
like
for me, it's about,
Yeah.
exactly, about like, who am I centering these narratives in, and how are those people viewing my activism work? And I think that's a question that everyone needs to consider. So yeah.
What's up?
Hey, Rasheed.
Hi, are you ready to go?
Yeah, are you ready?
Yep, let's do this. Let's go shop.
So yeah, how often have you gone to Plato's Closet?
I've realized that I've started like going to more thrift stores as of lately, instead of, you know, like shopping in stores like H&M and like stuff like that. 'Cause I don't know, I feel like you still get good quality clothing. Like, we're going towards Walgreens, by the way.
Right.
You still get good quality clothing, but like, you know, it's a far cheaper cost. Like, I have no problem like wearing something that's secondhand. I did that all my life growing up.
Right.
Like, you know, from my older cousins and stuff. What about you? Are you a big thrifter? I know fashion is like a big part of your life.
I mean, thrift stores are kind of a hit and miss sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you find some really awesome gems, and other times it's like, a little harder. But I think for me, I've become super conscious of like where I'm getting my fashion.
Yeah.
And not only in terms of sustainability, but also like in terms of like where, you know. Like you're right, like I stopped shopping at like Forever 21 or H&M just because it like, you don't get much wear out of those pieces anyway.
Yeah, like you wear them like a few times and then that's it.
Like, right, and then there's like a hole or like a seam comes out. So I just try to source like quality things that also I know like are made with more ethical labor. It's hard because like on the one hand you want to, you know, be like create or make as many ethical choices under capitalism as you can, which you know is like kind of an illusion, right?
Yeah.
But you know, try. But the other part is it is really expensive sometimes for those like places with ethical labor.
All right, so we're at the thrift store, and V's gonna get something for me, and I'm gonna get something for V. So let's see. She's the style expert. I'm not. So let's see. Let's see what happens. Let's
I don't
do
think
this.
that's true. Wow, this is a look. It's not my look, but it's a look.
All right. So I have chosen this beautiful top,
Wow.
skirt. Stuff.
You okay? You doing good?
For the pants.
Wow.
So you. Whenever you're ready.
All right, ready?
Yep.
Yes, pants. Oh, they look so good.
Do a twirl. You look good.
Thank
The
you.
colors work.
The monochromatic look, you know,
Yeah,
it's
that
very
works.
in.
Styled by V.
Styled by Rasheed.
Should we do some poses? So you've probably mentioned the whole astrology thing like 3 times now. I think you said your mom's a Scorpio, like
did.
you know, like 5 times in the entire
Oh,
spiel.
right.
So you've gotten this reputation for being known as that astrology kid on campus. We know you're passionate about it. So I want you to give me my read. So I was born on January 6, 1997 at 3:03 a.m. What's my spiel?
Okay, well,
Let's go.
so what I'm reading, I don't know if your audience could see this from this far away, but I'm reading what is a chart of where the planets and celestial beings were aligned the second that you were born. Your sun is in Capricorn, which everyone knows about. So your sun is like your core identity. It's kind of like what you come back to, what your instincts are usually. Capricorn is a cardinal sign. It's also an earth sign. It's one of 3 earth signs. What I mean by cardinal is every sign or every sign exists in like a timeline. And so cardinal signs kick off every season. Capricorn kicks off winter, Aries kicks off spring, Cancer kicks off summer, Libra kicks off fall. And what that means is like cardinal signs are usually the ones to take initiative on things. They usually are very ambitious. They're usually like kind of the spearheaders of projects. Capricorns, all right. I'm not trying to give you a big head. Capricorns are also earth signs. They're actually coincidentally my favorite earth sign, even though I have an affinity for all earth signs. People usually know them as very dependable people. They're very mature. Capricorns are also very into financial capital, whether that means security or like, you know, securing that bag. Capricorns are very into that whole kind of life pursuit. And they're also very, like I said, reliable, dependable people.
So how did you get like, you know, into this whole astrology world and like doing readings and yeah, how did you get into it?
Yeah, so huge shout out to one of my friends, Catherine Funes. I met her while I was abroad in Japan, and she is from California as well. And I remember we were taking a bus ride together to, I don't remember where it was, some city in Tokyo. And she was like, so you're a Libra, right? And I was like, yes, but also, what? How did you know I was a Libra?
Wow.
She's like, I could just tell from your energy and your aura. And I was like, well, you know, I'd been into astrology mildly before, but not to that extent. And she offered to do a full like chart reading for me. And so we sat down and she was like, your moon is in Leo, your rising is Sagittarius, all these things. And explained my entire life and my shortcomings to me in the matter of like an hour. And I was like, holy shit, like, I'm into this. And so that's when I started like really getting into astrology. And I think mostly for me, the fun part of astrology is like, I like to use it as a tool of introspection. I think I have a lot of gut feelings about people sometimes. I have people's energies come off a different way to me. And astrology is a way to kind of ground those and give them an answer. And I don't like to pigeonhole people with their charts. I really do think that people can break out of, you know, whatever their astrology says that they are. And I think people can learn to inhabit positive qualities of any sign that they want to.
There's wiggle room.
Exactly, there is wiggle, because humans are complex, and who knows how our personalities are even like created in the first place, right?
Exactly.
So
it's also interesting because I remember we were talking earlier, and you were saying that astrology also plays a big role in your life as a queer woman and in the queer community, you know, as a whole. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I feel like astrology has become a huge part of queer culture. I see a lot of memes about it. I see a lot of my friends who are queer getting into it. And I think I can't tell you why exactly. Queer folks have adopted this as part of, you know, how we build community, but it's been really fun. And I love being able to like know people's signs and stuff, so.
So for you, like being queer is not, you know, it's not only about sexual orientation or like a box that you check or like anything like that. It's also about, you know, your consciousness, your understanding of certain things, and also how you affect and change certain spaces, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you kind of already said it all in terms of how I think about it, but I came out originally as bi, and I think if we're going with like a strict, whatever that means, like, you know, definition of sexual orientation, then like, sure, I identify as bi. But I also don't think of it as a gender binary thing. There's a whole thing in the queer community that's still going on in terms of a debate about terms. But anyway, I came to identify as queer because I realized that like, just the way that I exist and the choices I make do queer the norm. And when I step into a space, I feel as though I'm queering whatever political space that exists. And well, I just think, you know, as a person of color and as an Asian woman, people hold a lot of, you know, ideas about me. And I think my sexual orientation being part of like this whole thing, I think it's about being like, no, those ideas that you hold about me, the trope of the submissive Asian, all of these really nasty like things, just they aren't necessarily true, and I'm not going to be part of your narrative.
So today there was a protest on campus that was organized by standing right there. That was organized by the surviving the remaining like students from like the Fort Hall protest at Brandeis in 2015, which was just a big protest that shut in on school, where a number of students occupied the administrative building for a number of reasons, but centered around you know, black student life on campus and the resources that were available to them and representation, a number of issues all bundled up into one. So we saw a rebirth of some sort of that protest today in 2019 on campus, and I know you participated along with a number of other students in that process. So why, first of all, and how did you feel about it?
Yeah, well, why? Because this shit matters. Like, if people of color are telling us on campus that, you know, they and we feel unsafe, feel policed, feel like that this place that is called our home is not our home, then I think that's really worth addressing. And you know, for me, I'm very conscious of the way that my identities like affect other people. I'm very conscious of the way I move about the world, and it's important to see a light-skinned, non-black person of color at these rallies because, you know, I think there's so many different layers to how systemic oppression affects us. There's, you know, within not only race but also like skin color and also gender, and so I just felt a responsibility to kind of to show up and to be there in solidarity, but also as an ally, because I think there are things that I will never have to experience because of my identities. And maybe, you know, never is a strong way. I don't know. But I think in terms of, you know, the issues that really do affect students of color on this campus, like there are things that I can sympathize with, but I can't empathize with.
Yeah.
And I think that those are moments where I choose to be an ally. And then there are also moments where I'm there in solidarity. I'm there as someone who's, you know, who knows what's going on and who's experienced some things. So,
yeah, excellent.
I think it's unfortunate, and there was a sign, and I want to credit whoever made the sign, but I don't know their name. There was a sign that was like, why are we still protesting this shit? You know, Fort Hall happened 4 years ago. People were sleeping on the floor for weeks in Bernstein Marcus so that students could feel safe. This wouldn't have to happen,
Yeah.
and it had to happen again. I you know, and that's really frustrating. But I think that in these moments, we do find unity, and I think there's a lot of strength and an outpouring of support that I saw today. Not just from students, from faculty and from
Staff as well.
Yeah, from staff and certain administrative representatives too. And so I hope that this gets somewhere, because once I graduate, like I don't know. I don't know what's gonna be the next thing in 4 years.
Okay, so let's talk about sex.
Let's talk about sex. Let's do it.
I know sex, for some reason, is like a conversation or a topic that people shy away from a lot. But like also in our previous conversation, we were just talking about like when you have unhealthy conversations about sex, or just no conversation about sex at all, you know, there are certain byproducts and like things that can come of it that aren't really productive or helpful to society as a whole. So share with the viewers a bit about, you know, your views about, you know, sex and just having a conversation about sex, a healthy conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think to start off, I want to think about kind of the history of sex and sexuality and the history of the ways that it has been regulated in the public sphere. We think about laws, you know, so-called sodomy laws against people who were gay having sex. We think about the history of colonization and how certain bodies are gendered and raced, and then certain qualities of sexuality are then mapped onto those bodies and used against them in a court of law. And I think if we really consider the way that sex has never been apolitical, it's always been political and politicized, then I think it's always an important conversation to be having. Now, on what you were saying, I think for me, my so-called, I don't want to say obsession, but I guess my, the thing that I gravitate to thinking about and talking about with people a lot, it is sex, because I think that, you know, we live in an era where, or I think we've always kind of lived in this era where people are trying to put value, like moral value, on certain forms of sex. And people aren't being taught like how to have healthy interactions with other people. And then people are also being taught that like only certain forms of sex are acceptable. And I think that is really damaging to people's psyche, and also really damaging to how like society thinks about those who exist in the margins.
What do you think can be done to like, you know, fix the issue around like talking about it? Like, is it something that should be done from an educational standpoint, or is there some different type of intervention that's necessary? What do you think?
You know, I think it involves a kind of faceted, very nuanced approach. I am all for sex education in high schools. I'm all for LGBTQ inclusive sex education, obviously, and for sex education that really considers the history, like I said, of colonization and of the ways that the law has interfered with sex. In addition to that, I'm also really interested in seeing how pornography shapes like the way that we think about sex. And I've, like some of my favorite porn companies do very creative, kind of artwork-esque types of sex. And you know, I think being more comfortable with talking about how we consume media and consume media that portrays sex and sexuality in a certain way will help push the conversation forward.
Okay, so I want you, in 3 words, to describe yourself. For everyone watching, if they're like, who is Vi Pham? Give them 3 words. Who is Vi Pham?
I hate your question so much, but I'm going to answer it just for you. My 3 words to describe myself would be kind, resourceful, and gritty. Having grit.
Grit's important. That's a good 3 words, and I definitely back them up. Thank you so much for coming on, ending the season off strong, and talking about these difficult conversations that I really hope people continue to have. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.